Sabalenka was not forewarned. There was no encounter, no challenging dialogue, and no instance in which someone looked her in the eye and informed her that things were improving. The renewal talks were taking place one day, and then they abruptly stopped. She was waiting for a call, but it never came. Furthermore, there is no room for interpretation when it comes to luxury brand relationships. It is the solution. The events that took place on a tennis court have virtually little to do with this story. It all stems from a single strategic choice made by a Swiss watch company in a boardroom. Depending on your point of view, it may be the most astute long-term investment in sports marketing history or the most heinous betrayal of athletic merit in a generation. In any case, sponsorship of women's sports has changed significantly since then. Understanding Sabalenka's true nature is essential to appreciating the entire impact of what transpired, as ignoring her diminishes the plot. She became skilled at more than simply tennis. She developed into a player that the sport produces perhaps once every 15 years, one who is so emotionally charged, physically formidable, and ruthlessly competitive that opponents aren't merely attempting to outwit her strategically. They were attempting to psychologically survive her. She won the Australian Open twice in a row before the end of 2024, and she also won the US Open. She was in first place. Almost everyone in the business world was aware that she was the world's most powerful female tennis player. She belonged to Porsche. She was surrounded by international lifestyle brands. Through years of relentless perseverance, she had developed the exact profile that premium brands are meant to pursue. Thus, her team entered renewal talks with a well-known Swiss watch company with serene assurance. Not conceit or self-assurance. The kind that results from having the titles, the numbers, and the cultural impact to support it. They thought the deal had already been completed. All that was required was paperwork, after which the temperature shifted. Emails that had previously returned promptly began to arrive late gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Conversations that had been friendly and cooperative became methodical, well-crafted, and detached. Shift has a recognized texture, as anyone with experience in high-level business talks would attest. It's the noise an agreement makes just before it expires. However, no one made a direct statement. Nobody from the brand took a seat across the table and gave an explanation of the situation. The conversation just stagnated, slowed, and ultimately came to an end. The team of Sabalenka waited. There was never any confirmation. Then, before they had had a chance to properly comprehend the quiet, the news suddenly broke everywhere, not just privately through their channels. The company was still involved in tennis. They had discovered someone completely different. Someone who is 18. Alex, someone from Manila. The entire worldwide commercial apparatus of professional sports is currently learning that name by heart, so keep in mind where you heard it. Born in the Philippines, she trained at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, one of the world's most technical tennis schools. At the age of 18, she made it to her first Grand Slam main draw and became the first Filipino player in the Open era to do so. It's not a footnote. That is a fact of history. Additionally, when a gifted player performs well in a tournament, the response throughout Southeast Asia wasn't one of courteous, measured applause. It was louder and more unadulterated than that. Manila front pages. On its finest day, no advertising campaign could have created the kind of community pride that is lighting up social media in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia. It was more than just a tennis match that millions of people were watching. They were witnessing someone who resembled them enter one of the major sporting venues and feel like they belonged there. For months, the research team of the Swiss company had been discreetly and systematically monitoring everything. The deal is reportedly worth $300 million, but the structure is just as important as the sum. This isn't a simple endorsement deal where a company pays an athlete a set amount to appear in a campaign for a few years. According to industry specialists who have studied the system, endorsement fees are only the foundation of a far more intricate multi-layered agreement that might last 8 to 10 years. Above that are co-designed product lines that directly benefit from Alex's creative input, regional campaign budgets targeted at Southeast Asian markets, charitable elements connected to Philippine educational initiatives, and performance bonuses based on career milestones anticipated over the course of the agreement. This isn't a sponsorship in the conventional meaning of the word. It's a 10-year co-investment in a person's career. What she has previously done is not being accepted by them. For everything that is still to come, they are purchasing a seat at the table. Even by the standards of expensive luxury transactions, the level of secrecy surrounding the negotiations was exceptional. Initial contact apparently occurred through intermediaries rather than the customary direct agency channels, which would have promptly alerted rival companies that anything important was underway. Meetings were held in neutral venues. All participants, even those within the brand's own organization, were bound by non-disclosure agreements. It appears that fewer than 12 executives within the organization were aware of the conversations at their most restricted phase. In a field where information leaks frequently, the degree of operational discipline needed to keep something this important under wraps speaks volumes about how seriously the brand regarded the choice. The reaction was swift and overwhelming when it finally came to light, first through a leak to a sports business journalist and then formally verified within hours. In just 48 hours, Alex amassed around 4 million followers on social media. According to reports, the brand's own engagement metrics reached previously unheard-of levels. For 3 days in a row, the announcement went viral in the Philippines. An 18-year-old from Manila has recently emerged as one of the sport's most valued athletes from a purely business standpoint. Let's now discuss the consequences, as that is the point at which the tennis community can no longer agree on anything and things become very messy. According to reports, Sabalenka's closest associates, her advisors, agents, and the experts who had worked for years to shape her business trajectory, were enraged rather than mildly dissatisfied. And the anger makes sense when you consider it from their point of view. It would have been sad but understandable from a professional standpoint to lose a significant luxury brand renewal to another well-established winner. It hurts in a totally different way to lose to a teenager who has only made a few Grand Slam appearances, hasn't won any major titles yet, and whose profile was still mostly unknown in Western markets. It feels more like a statement than merely a business choice. According to sources, Sabalenka's management circle was extremely irritated for weeks. It appears that discussions were held over whether legal advice was necessary and whether any exclusivity terms or contractual provisions had been handled incorrectly during the non-renewal process. There was no formal outcome. However, long after the initial statement faded from the news, the temperature inside that circle remained high. Once you mapped them out, the divisions in the larger tennis community weren't all that shocking. Sabalenka was largely supported by seasoned athletes, past winners, and the more well-known figures in sports media. Rather than being written off as defensiveness, their point merits consideration. What is athletic excellence really worth to the business entities who profit from it if regular significant winning performances at the top of the world rankings cannot ensure premium brand loyalty? There isn't a clear solution to that genuine question, which has unsettling ramifications. Conversely, younger athletes and coaches who are developing. Athletes and markets from areas that luxury brands had mostly ignored for decades reacted to Alex's signing in quite different ways. For many years, Southeast Asian tennis produced technically proficient, highly driven players who developed sincere domestic fan bases while staying almost unnoticed by the global marketing apparatus. For that community, Alex's contract was evidence that the geography of economic power was finally beginning to change. Both viewpoints are truthful. Nothing is fully captured by either. And throughout it all, there are disagreements, industry criticism, and social media conflicts between conflicting data and ideas about what sports marketing ought to prioritize. At the age of 18, Alex had to navigate a level of international attention that would be difficult for athletes twice her age and experience. The loudness usually drowns out that part. The protagonist of this tale is still a teenage girl who, not too long ago, was just a young child from Manila with a racket and an ambition big enough to take her to Spain and then to a Grand Slam main draw. She is now a $300 million business opportunity. No matter how many Instagram followers you have, the weight of that is real. This is the most important thing, yet it gets lost in the online debates and personal allegiances. When you remove all of that and focus only on the financial reasoning behind this choice, a noteworthy conclusion regarding the real use of sports marketing funds in the second part of this decade becomes apparent. There are about 700 million people living in Southeast Asia. Adults between the ages of 18 and 35 have the fastest-growing consumer group within that population due to their rising incomes and well-established interest in high-end products. Throughout the early 2020s, the region's luxury consumption increased at rates that made traditional Western markets appear sluggish in contrast, and this trend is expected to continue picking up speed until 2030. Tennis has been gaining significant popularity in a number of Southeast Asian nations, in part due to government funding for sports and in part due to the rise of local players who turn the sport from something alien and distant into something intimate and culturally relevant. Millions of people in Manila are not merely watching tennis when a teenage Filipino wins a Grand Slam main event. They're learning that they fit in with that discussion. Luxury brands have spent decades and vast sums of money attempting to artificially create that psychological change from passive observer to emotionally committed participant. The Swiss company did not produce it for Alex. They chose to stand next to it after discovering that it already existed. Beyond the demographics, the agreement illustrates a larger trend in premium sports partnerships, a conscious preference for rising stories over well-established ones. Sabalenka has had an incredible career. Her most dramatic chapters have already been written, yet that is undeniable. There is documentation for the titles. The history books include the records. Commercially speaking, she is a known quantity, and even though she is impressive, a known quantity offers a brand something quite different from an athlete whose path is still clearly in progress. The capacity to develop with someone and be present for the moments that haven't yet occurred offers a kind of strategic value for a firm committing to an 8 to 10-year collaboration that can't be duplicated by inheriting an athlete's current legacy. The champion at the top may not be the most marketable version of an athlete. It may be the one that is still ascending, the one whose ceiling is still obscured. It's an unsettling thought. It contradicts what the majority of people intuitively believe about the connection between reward and success. However, it seems to be changing the way the most thoughtful luxury brands make investment decisions. The legend of Sabalenka will never fade. What she established on those courts and what she demonstrated was feasible is unaffected by boardroom decisions. That is entirely hers. However, Alex's tale is just getting started, and one of the world's most exacting and strategic companies just invested $300 million in the idea that a story that is currently being written is more valuable than one that has already been completed. Only time will tell if that proves to be a costly error or a visionary move. Right now, one thing is certain: the rules are different. Professional sports now define commercial value differently than they did a year ago. At the center of it all is an 18-year-old from Manila who still has a ways to go before she plays her best tennis. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Was this the right decision, or did the corporate community just made the worst mistake in the history of tennis sponsorship? The most significant events in professional sports hardly ever get the main stage, so if this kind of story is what you're looking for, subscribe. Nevertheless, we locate them.